Hi, Anita. Nice seeing you. Yeah, it's always a pleasure seeing you. Uh, okay, we can start now, Versa. That's all right?
Yes, ma'am. We can start now.
Okay. It's really my pleasure to welcome Anita to this lecture series from NMRC, Zakir Hussain Center for Educational Studies. In fact, I know Professor Anita Rampal, for nearly 3 decades now. Even when I was doing my PhD, I did my PhD on social identity. But that's when the probe report came. And we were so curious, about probe report, where the authors were mostly women. And suddenly you get to read school education status in India from very, very different and engaging lens. And then, of course, I came in contact with her work on mathematics. Anita, of course, is a physicist by training, but contributed to the field of science and mathematics education equally, or maybe mathematics education a little more, school mathematics education. And she has been attached to major debates like Right to Education Act, NCF 2005, where she was a major, she was the part of the drafting committee as well as chaired school mathematics education. And she has been a prolific writer on mathematics and science education. Um, there are many more to say about Anita. I'll not take time. She doesn't need any introduction. She's a public scholar. So, Anita, I welcome you to this lecture series. And as all of you know, she'll be talking about, a topic that interests me a lot, interrogating 21st century discourses on mathematics education. I like little historical, kind of engagement with her discipline. And she's going to do that in this talk, I believe. So Anita, I welcome you. Please, over to you.
Thank you.
Maybe 45 minutes you can take, and then question answer. Normally, we go on till 5 o'clock, but if everybody wants a little longer, we are fine. Yeah. Anita, over to you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Minati. Thanks, the center. Wonderful to be connecting with JNU, even though I'm quite close right now. But yes, I think what I wish to speak on is, we are hearing a lot of these 21st century discourses and contesting them. And also right now in mathematics, it's been very strong because the global governor, as we call it, or as is known, the OECD, has been, and the SDG goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, because they're linked. They look at the assessment through the PISA tests, which are the international tests. And the last cycle was in mathematics in 22. And that's why the whole plan for Maths 2030 has come out even before science and language. So the whole focus has been on mathematics, just before what is the end of the SDG goals, the limit that we need to place before ourselves. So I've been engaging with this and looking at it and writing about it. And I'd like to just say some things. I'd like to look at what are these 21st century discourses that we are hearing, to question where they're coming from, because they clearly are coming from one part of our population. And when I say the global north, I mean the global north and global south are not geolocations, but are communities and societies and discourses. And geo south really, and the global north is something which is a shared and sort of history of subjugation, of globalization and imperialism, etc. So that is, we have global norths and souths everywhere in Delhi or in India or across the world. So when I'm saying that, it's not a point in geology, but really looking at discourses and histories and visions for the future. We know that right now, what has happened in the States is concerning, is worrying everyone. We've just had debates and international uh, conferences around climate, and we know that from the global south, we don't call it climate change because that's a very benign way of looking at things. It's a very benign way, but we like to think of climate justice and or ecological justice. So I'll also bring in something like that of what is our concern right now and how should we be looking at mathematics, or how are these discourses actually taking us back to a past history of looking at the world in a divided way. And is my sound okay? Okay.
Yes.
So,
Perfect,
okay.
audible.
You're fine.
Yeah, okay. So we've lived through a quarter of the century, 21st century, and we faced a devastating pandemic. So can we say that now we understand what kind of mathematics education that we need now and in the decades to follow? And terms such as these 21st century skills, they are proliferating global policy debates and discourses, yet they come with a past baggage and a deep history of the way mathematics, or of the way ability and people's knowledge is looked at. So I'll come to that. Should we celebrate or introspect that mathematics scores have become a ubiquitous benchmark for success in later life? I mean, we always talk, not just here, but across the world, if people want to look at education, quality of education, now more and more, they're looking at maths class 4. Mathematics becomes a benchmark. Why is that? And we watch parents, I've seen several of these, we watch parents being advised to give more household chores to young children because they say that longitudinal studies have found that to develop self-confidence and concern for others and good scores in mathematics, you should be doing household chores. So that's very curious for us, I mean, if chores help children's mathematics, why do we only counsel the homes? Why not advocate for children taking up work responsibilities in school? And are those who work at home or outside, are they accorded recognition in school for their mathematical learnings? Even as even as these 21st century skills are being professed and an engagement with the real world is called for, ironically, there is a deepening divide between the many real worlds of home, school, and work. And we find that elsewhere, we find it in our own country. We find the way our new policy is now defining vocational education, pushing it right down to the younger classes and saying, we are going to separate. We're going to have 50% school students and 50% students at college who are in the vocational track. But what is this vocational track? We seem to know pretty well from the courses that we see. But what is it? So whose world, which work gets counted and why? And importantly, is work entwined with people's lives and livelihoods? Is that counted as professional? How is work counted? So the energy scientist Vaclav Smil, he wonders why people living in modern societies, and especially urban societies, have no understanding of how the world works. It's not because, everyday life is filled with black boxes like a phone or an electrical grid or even a vaccination, he says, because they're complicated, yet you don't need to understand that to make use of that. We can be using a phone without knowing how it works. But he thinks that the problems are different. He thinks that very few people producing the essential materials of the world, causes the fact that very few people are actually producing this causes a comprehension deficit. So he says that barely 1% of Americans, which are about 3 million, produce food. They do the plowing, sowing, weeding, harvesting, looking after animals, but most don't know how food reaches them. And similarly, he says that less than 0.25% of Chinese, that is about 3.6 million, produce 1 billion tons of steel. So these are the basic materials of life, he says. And all the smelting, casting, rolling, the majority of them remain untouched. They don't know what these processes are. So knowledge about process of production has come to be seen as old-fashioned, he feels, and if not outdated, and distinctly unexciting compared to the world of information, data, and images. And the proverbial best minds do not go into soil science, do not try their hand at making better cement, for instance. Instead, they are attracted to dealing with disembodied information, now just streams of electrons in myriads of micro devices. From lawyers and economists to code writers and money managers, their disproportionately high rewards are for work completely removed from the material realities of life on Earth. So what is happening? He, of course, calls for policies responsive to the material realities of the world, and many economists too are doing that. But the question is that the large share of humanity living in conditions which the affluent minority has left behind more than a century ago. Yet, what is not reckoned here is, as in most 21st century discourses, that it is the majority of humanity in deprivation that is producing the world's basic necessities. And the kind of education discourses are completely alienated from this majority that is actually producing these basic necessities. So the global numbers of people producing food are not small. They're not the 3 million that he may have counted located in America, but the global numbers are not small. And in fact, the large majority is from the global south. And when we look at the studies that have been done, in fact, just last year, there's been a study on agri-food systems. And I've been looking at some of these things a little more closely because labor force enumeration usually undercounts those engaged in household farming, whose livelihoods, at least in part, rely on AFS. AFS are the agri-food systems, which means agriculture, forestry, and fishing. So what happens is that the definition of employment doesn't look at people. Now, a report has come out which says that we should be counting people and not jobs, because that's where we're completely missing out on who is doing what. And this is an FAO report along with the university. The data that was been used, that was the 2019 data was used, report came out last year, but the data says that there are about 4 billion people who are engaged in AFS, whose lives depend on growing food or in forestry and in hunting. So that is not a small number. And not surprisingly, about 2.5 million of that is in Asia. So the question is that are the education or is the mathematics that we are talking about even listening to people who are actually doing this? We are saying that the divorce of producing basic amenities is getting very sharp, and we're not looking at it through education. It's not exciting enough. But then is education at all looking at what is happening? And we find that that's not necessarily happening. The recipe that is made for 21st century maths, or even sort of more and more now in this decade, completely doesn't look at how life is, how people are living their lives and what kind of maths they're doing. I mean, it looks at agriculture. It's based on US labor force data. And so we can understand that it says agriculture needs just 3 areas of mathematics. And, it's a very, very superficial kind of study, but it's the one which actually then speaks for the world. So the global north and the committees which are sitting there, especially in OECD, I've been through all their reports in the last few years. They in fact say that, there was a time when we used to have waiters in a restaurant would come to us and take our order on a slip of paper and calculate the bill and give it back to us. Oh, well, that was a long time back. Which world are they talking about? I mean, I don't think many of us go to restaurants where orders are taken only on tablets. So I think, and also the kind of, they say, there was a time, not long time back, when we looked at railway timetables. And now, you don't need to do that. Woodworkers don't need to know more about trigonometry. Carpenters, they need more of data. So the way of looking at work is extremely problematic. And the way the work sort of gets divided into what kind of work they're seeking, what kind of work should they be encouraging, and what kind of maths should they be encouraging gets completely divorced from the lives of the majority. So I'll take one small little example of how an economist has sort of brilliantly looked at what the material world is going through. And in fact, I'm sort of briefly describing the volcanic odyssey of silicon, how it's sort of blasted out of sand, blasted out of quartzite, and then what happens? And then it now we think that life can depend on these little tiny little chips, and all life gets determined by that. But people are saying that even the processes that go into that are not well understood. And who is going to go into that? Where are people going to come who do the science and the mathematics to understand that better? So it is, for instance, this little silicon is blasted out of a quartzite quarry, metamorphosed into an ultra pure, ultra thin wafer through a panorama of sophisticated processing in taxing conditions, even under acute secrecy. From smelting at 18,000 degrees centigrade to energy-intensive grinding, smashing, recombining of atoms, cycles of heating and cooling, navigating around the globe three times to super specialized locations, fabricated in sterile units. The air is cleaned 600 times an hour, insulated by dampers from any possible seismic movement, having thousands of nanotransistors lithographed by extreme ultraviolet light. The tiny silicon wafer is birthed by innumerable mind-boggling 21st century tasks of the material world, far from the sanitized, sedentary futures usually imagined for its ethereal consumers. They imagine that life can go on. In fact, they're saying that many of the countries in the global north are dematerializing. And that, again, is a manipulated way of looking at GDP, because the GDP doesn't look at this. It doesn't look at where you're outsourcing the materials from, where you're flattening out mountains and digging the earth. It doesn't look at that. So they claim that they are showing a less use of resources with increasing GDP, and economists are questioning that, because you're offshoring even the resources, even the extraction of resources through which you're living. And so I'm questioning these discourses, which are not just related to education, but also how education gets hitched on to the discourses about production. So education will need to be reimagined and recrafted, intrigued and inspired by the material world, to propel young people from across the planet in transforming the nature of work. Traditional institutes of engineering and research in metallurgy may be closing down. Yet this tiny wafer, finding itself in uncountable everyday objects, opens an array of possibilities within yet not fully understood knowledge domains. Even after a century of smelting a mixture of quartz and coal at high temperatures, under strong electrical fields, experts find the reactions yet too complex for a mathematical model. Indeed, the challenge of doing mathematics for sustainable futures should forge diverse domains together to traverse uncharted transnational terrains. Centuries of dichotomies, and I come to this, of creative versus routine, head versus hand, scholar versus artisan, science versus technology, mathematics versus its application, are now being challenged through connected rationalities of knowledge and material production. Interestingly, when people are looking at, for instance, through the 21st century examination, are looking at a 13th century construction practice, for instance. They're looking at, for instance, how a cathedral was built, and they say that they find it, the Chartres Cathedral, for instance, they say it reveals elaborate negotiations within the knowledge production assemblage of diverse groups. So construction geometry is knowledgeably mediated with specialized templates and simple tools like the compass, straight edge, and string through oral communication. Yet, this was performed without building plans, without architects or theories of structural dynamics and mechanics. historians of science and architecture, even as Bernal and Hyman, have dismissed them as ad hoc and messy, mysterious processes of trial and error, and as mere technical craft, not scientific knowledge. So I'm just saying that in the 21st century, we are looking back at some of these processes. We are finding the amazing sophistication that's gone into the mathematics that has been used by the artisans, by the planners, and yet historians of science till now have called it, oh well, these are just magical products. They are so they say they don't see a theory of the arch or the problem of parallelogram of forces in medieval times. And without the concept of force and its line of action, they find it impossible for builders to calculate and find the line of thrust in a flying buttress. The structure, standing for 800 years, is taken to be a miraculous product of practical abilities, within inverted commas. What are these practical abilities? The sharp distinction and opposition between head and hand as bodily sites of production of high status knowledge versus lowly skills have had a persistent legacy of knowledge workers striving to maintain their hegemonic position in the social and economic order. However, with many of these anachronistic ideas of scientific and industrial revolutions being reappraised, the narratives of knowledge and material production converge as a complex hybrid process with inquiry and invention intimately interwoven. And as Josephine Quinn, the historian, reminds us in her recent book, that it's only 200 years since Western civilization was invented, when ideas of racial hierarchy and civilization were forged together to map historically shared cultures and knowledges onto particular geographies. The 21st century thus finds itself grounded in epistemological questioning of what has been taken to be modern, universal, scientific, or mathematical knowledge. Indeed, ascribing modern science or mathematics education to the global north can be a form of othering. But this exactly is what's happening. And do we see how it's happening? Studies and surveys for framing Mathematics 2030 were undertaken by OECD and its partners, and new competencies included in the mathematical cycle for PISA 2022. The Strategic Mathematics Advisory Group, none of its 7 members from the Global South, and other experts recommended less explicit teaching of arithmetic, geometry, algebra in the face of rapid automation. It said that not so long ago, as I said, waiters in restaurants would multiply and add and calculate the price to be paid for. Today, they just press buttons on handheld devices. So our world, which comes in these discourses, and our education systems are beckoned to prepare students for high-paying knowledge aid jobs and for complex and creative tasks, liberated by technology from the dull, routine, mental tasks, which can be automated or outsourced at lower wages to the industrial age world, which includes India and China. We are named as countries which are the industrial age world, and that we can look after the environmental hazards too. The routine mental tasks, and also we can handle the grime and the environmental hazards. I mean, I was shocked when I saw in a document by a very major partner of OECD talking about mathematics, and they'd made a graphical future of 21st century work, and it was a pyramid, and on top of that was the creative work which was right within the developed world. The apex, the creative occupied the crest of the pyramid in more developed countries, and the routine comprised the bulk of its body, which they wrote was in less developed countries. So this is indeed shocking that even as we go into the 21st century, we are being pushed back even further. I mean, we know that now the current regime in the US has come with extreme sort of climate deniers and people with that understanding that they're going to come, and this is going to show up much more in terms of the education discourses that we are finding. So claims, So, in fact, a mathematics curriculum document analysis by OECD actually found a large gap between policy and practice. And they even said that, even though when the real world application problems show a dismal picture because word problems are really nothing more than computational problems only surrounded by words. And that's what we see. They're totally decontextualized. They claim they're talking something about the environment, which is not. It's only a computational problem. And so it's just sort of hoodwinking us to believe that, these are word problems. And the study notes that if policies do not influence textbooks developed by private players, because most countries have private players developing textbooks, then children of different socioeconomic status would be deprived of mathematical knowledge and reasoning necessary for society to address, and I quote, serious problems facing the world, including climate change, raging pandemics, and even the very survival of democracy. Indeed, but what is that knowledge and how do we deliberate on it? So I have found that the OECD and most of this testing that they're doing is actually is doing a universal standards setting, and it's calling mathematical reasoning, it's attaching it to computational thinking. And that was the only change we found in our policy. Instead of in mathematics, we thought we also got computational reasoning. So that was a demand that has come. But what they're doing is the testing becomes, the 21st century curricula has a dual demand. One is more complex mathematics for selecting the few high performers for creative work. And also, the same mechanism which they use, especially the online testing, is to show that the bulk of low performers, ascribing their low performance to low effort, less resilient backgrounds and work that is suitable, and people who are suitable for routine work. And this is what is extremely damaging and extremely problematic. And I've been calling this out, that the algorithms they use now, instead of talking about what change they might need in mathematics, that they're pushing up more and more in terms of more abstract mathematics, but they're asking for resilience. They're saying the same test should be testing resilience. And we know what this means. This resilience is when children are taking a little longer in answering a question, or they are a little confused. So you say, well, they are not resilient enough, or they are not sort of good enough to be doing the more challenging tasks. And let's see the numbers. The numbers have, in fact, between the last cycle of mathematics to this one, the numbers have between 2018 and 22, the average performance in mathematics has deteriorated precipitously, according to the OECD. And it's fallen by 15 points in OECD countries. Though it has not been so bad, this is not declining, and it was declining much before the pandemic. So pandemic does not have the reason for this. So students are labeled low performers in mathematics if they do not attain basic proficiency in the PISA 22. PISA 2022, there was a level 2 out of 8 proficiencies, and the basic was called, if they did not do it, then they're low performers. An average of 31% students are low performers across 37 OECD countries. That is really shocking. And in 35 of the 81 participatory countries, so there's some countries or some economies, like Shanghai comes and not the whole of China, India tried to emulate that and announced that India would come into PISA 2021, which was held in 22, and it took only Chandigarh. So it chose only Chandigarh as the union territory and the Kendriya Navodaya Vidyalayas. Now, that's not even an economy. I mean, so India has done a very, very selective and clever sort of choice to show how well we do. But luckily for us, because we have opposed this right for many years after that, the 2009 and 10 sort of disaster that happened, the debacle, when World Bank pushed Tamil Nadu and Himachal to take it. Again, the ministry said no, but the World Bank pushed 2 states, the best provision states, to take PISA. And when those 2 states came second last, the media went berserk. I mean, there was chest beating and there was public shaming of the public system, and everyone went berserk. And I have heard senior people of Pratham say that RTE should be shoved in the dustbin. They should be thrown into the dustbin because look what's happening and how low our public system is. So the idea is to create, you manufacture a crisis through these kind of tests. You don't look at actually what needs to be done. And now India had for 2-3 years decided that they'll take Chandigarh, but I heard that very quietly it has shelved that. It did not send it into 22 because we know we're not ready. When our system of teaching and learning is not ready, how can one test be? And I met some teachers in Chandigarh who said how they were being made to prepare every day through drills and tests, but that doesn't help. So the showcasing of something at the world, Vishwa Guru is showcasing at the international level, is something which is damaging to the entire system because we push through a curriculum which doesn't really make sense to anyone. And this is what's happening, 31% across the world. And just look at that, 35 of the 81 participating countries or economies, in 35, more than half the students are low performers. In 12 of them, more than 80% are low performers. I know one of them. I've been closely associated with Indonesia. They had invited me in the last couple of years because they had rushed to change their curriculum because they were doing very badly in PISA. They're not an OECD country, but they've been pushed into PISA because, as they say, they're surrounded by high-performing countries. So there's a lot of pressure in Australia. Then comes sort of weighing down on them and also does studies to show how badly they're doing. So that again is a pressure, and they confided in me that they were under pressure. But when I saw the syllabus, it was terrible. Their class 10 mathematics book was 700 pages, 100 pages on integrals. I mean, what did it mean? And so when they have been coming, 95% of their children are near the end, really near the end. 82% are at level 2 and 13 are below level 2 and 13% are at level 2. So 95% are really low performers. And they've been doing these tests for 20 years. So it's a farce to get into this international testing because then the pressures of doing that become much more, and their whole system, their entire system has become multiple choice. Even grade 3 and grade 4 are doing only multiple choice. So what do you learn doing a multiple choice test, whether in language or mathematics? Because they are now gearing their national test also is like a multiple choice. They think because PISA is multiple choice, they must also do that. So it's completely warped, and their own mathematics professors and teachers they were happy that I wrote a very strong report. I said that why are we using children and teachers as guinea pigs to find out something that we know? We should know about our system. We don't need to push them there, demoralize them, demean them, humiliate them, and then say that, oh, well, our system needs, we need to do something about our system. And I can't find out from India how much money they may have spent at that time in between two states. They got it from the World Bank. But I know from their highest officials and that they spend huge amounts of money just to take the PISA test. That's the money that they have to give, and that's the money that they need to conduct it within the country, and the translations and also it's huge. Anyway, so I'm just saying that even in prominent OECD countries, like there are only 6 countries or economies, only 6 in this entire range of 81 participating countries, which are deemed close to achieving universal basic proficiency in mathematics. Can we believe this? With all the resources at their command, because only 15% or less of their students are low performers. So for countries when 15% or less are low performers, you are close to achieving basic proficiency, and there are only 6 out of 81. So, but no questions asked. None of these policy reports or the analysis even ask the question. So they have 30% in Germany, 29 low performers in France, 28 in Sweden, 27% in Australia, 25% in Finland, 20% in Switzerland, 16% in Korea. These are low performers. Yet surprisingly, no introspection and no change suggested in the mathematics content. On the contrary, tremendous effort is seen to be invested. You can read it in the policies in placing the responsibility onto students, and therefore the policy implications are to develop their growth mindset, to reduce mathematical anxiety, put it all on the student. And the worst, to have a positive disposition towards failure. I'm shocked to read this. When I sort of, especially with international friends in maths education, when I really sort of, shrug and seem completely shocked, and they say, why? I said, this is ridiculous. We can't believe that we are telling children, oh, don't feel too sad, be happy, be positive towards failure. I mean, this is something which is crucial for our education systems, that at least children are not pushed out because they are not failing, they're being pushed out. So this is what is with them. And so questions need to be asked about substantial populations of the youth of these countries being labeled as low performers. What happens? What can they see? What lies in their future? And these are questions that we need to be asking. Of course, we know that countries with high economic inequality and highly unequal systems of education are constrained in the quality they provide. So for us, even these numbers, as I said, for Indonesia, I mean, to be told that your 95% population is doing poorly doesn't help. This number doesn't help. It demoralizes them. It puts them into panic, and the way they change their curricula, I've seen one round of that. So we need to take adequate time. Countries which have worked and taken a long time, they actually establish a virtuous cycle in the domains of education, teacher education, and assessment. And that is important. I would, I'd just now like to say that, what is it that why are we not asking questions about what needs to be done, and also what is happening in terms about the question. I mean, for instance, these international tests keep asking questions about, about the questions that they ask even in grade 3, because for instance, Mexico, not only are they taking the international test, but even national tests get designed in the same way. So they have questions about pets and passports and people counting devices or aquatic gym sports. I mean, all these are being asked of grade 3 children in their national tests. And we find that this is happening too. I mean, the tests don't make sense. So we'll be throwing out children now with more and more of our Parak and our NTA and our national centralized testing without asking what really has to be taught and what is being taught, and are we alienating people from the lives they do? So I'll come to one example. The last example of that I wanted to raise is that if we look at, for instance, one of the chapters that we had made in the NCERT book was on fish workers. We had actually tried to look at livelihoods. We looked at masons, brick workers, fish workers, and somehow the chapter on fish workers has been taken up by
We couldn't. Varsha, can you hear?
Ma'am's mic got muted.
The connection got disconnected. Yeah.
So
is it okay
fish
now?
workers, we could hear till fish worker, the beginning of that example.
Okay. So I'll just take an example that very recently there was a lot of discussion on fish workers, and there was also a case. I mean, there's a network of people who are working on sustainability. It's actually a group of Global University on Sustainability, which has been working on many of these issues. And recently, a study had been done on Fukushima. Because 10 years of Fukushima this was the 13th year after Fukushima, and there was a lot of questioning around what was happening even today. So we know that, for instance, and I was writing, there was a book that came out and I was writing for them. And we know that, there is, even today, what is happening there is that there's been, it was after the, I think people know, but I'll quickly sort of read out that what happened on March 11th, 2024, right now, was the 13th anniversary of the Fukushima disaster. And that had seen over 20,000 people dying and towns being wiped out after a massive earthquake of 9.0 on the magnitude scale and a tsunami that had hit the northern coast. The tsunami at some places rose up to 15 meters and had battered the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant and destroyed its power supply and fuel cooling systems, causing meltdowns at 3 of its reactors. The exploding hydrogen had caused massive radiation leaks, with contamination in the neighboring areas, and investigations had attributed the accident to human error, safety negligence, lax oversight, etc., etc. The nuclear power plants, all of them had been shut down after Fukushima, and for safety checks and stricter standards. Now, because then there's been pressure to come back to nuclear energy, 12 of them have restarted out of the 33 workable, but there is a lot of community pressure on that, because again and again something is happening. Again, this year in January itself, there was a major earthquake, and at Shika nuclear power plant, 200 people died. And there's major scare. Not only that, Fukushima continues to pose major concerns. The 880 tons of nuclear fuel that had melted and remained inside the 3 damaged reactors, which the officials say can take 30 to 40 years to remove. And there is no clear understanding of the state of the molten debris. Robotic probes were used to check, but the technical and other complications, high levels of radiation, have delayed the process. So it's 13 years since then, and that debris still remains. And what they started doing last year was, just some months back, is that they've been pushing in seawater in it to, they think that this is going to be taking away the contamination and dumping it again in the sea. And this has been really, I mean, this year there have been major questions asked, and the fisher folk have, I was attending online a meeting when they are actually filed a lawsuit against this. And they are questioning how science and mathematics could have come to this point, that they have no way to deal with it, and they're only dumping it in the sea. So I just briefly refer to that and say, how is it? What is it that we are doing in our education? Because I refer to Ole Skosmose, who's a critical mathematics educator, and he uses the term. He says he was inspired by the term "the banality of evil," which Hannah Arendt had written about when she was actually going through the trials of a Nazi, of Eichmann. And she said that it's that when you invisibilize evil, it becomes faceless. You don't even know who the actors are. The person who is doing it seemed to say that he was not guilty. He was only following the bureaucratic procedures. He was sending people into the gas chambers to be killed because he was just doing his duty. And he was very diligently following the procedures, doing all the calculations, doing everything of what was required. So Ole says that, what about the banality of mathematical practice? Are we at all conscious about this? Which means, is it totally, do we divorce it from actual practice? Do we divorce it from the social context? Do we divorce it from the ethics of what's happening? And then do we think that, just doing the numbers and doing all the computations is going to be good mathematics? So he has been critical of this and constantly said that he thinks that in fact school education he thinks has brought in more criticality. So there have been some experiments across the world where people are bringing in these ideas, bringing in critical pedagogy to bring in contextualize and think about issues of the world around us and how we relate to it, whether it's climate justice or whether it's anything else. So he thinks that probably school education might be a role model for even higher mathematics, because higher mathematics seems to be quite out of the purview of issues like that. So within this banality of mathematical practice. I was taking one example, which is Fukushima. I was saying that there, what is it that the best, Japan is sort of highest up when we think of science and technology, when we think of, when we think of whether it's production or manufacture or this. And if there can be questions today of people filing file suits against the government, against the nuclear electric company TEPCO, and saying that what is it that you have done? What other computations have you done? How have you actually assessed what happened, and how are you going to look forward into the future? Because if you're going to take 30, 40 years, even then you don't know what's wrong and how you're going to do it. And cleaning radioactivity is not just a simple cleanup job. So I'm taking this because this was very critical, the way people were talking, the fisher folk were talking about it. And so, in fact, what happened was that again in February, even before they were doing this, they were just bringing in the seawater and trying to, the material that had been kept for 12 years, the radiation, the contaminated material, the cooling water actually had contaminated. So they kept it for 12 years. And then they started pumping in seawater, and they calculated that they'll keep filling this in 1,000 tanks and before intermittently discharging it into the sea. And the plan to release 31,000 tons of treated water by the end of March this year was only expected to empty 40 tanks. There were still 1,000 tanks. I'm just saying, look at the scale at which this dumping into the sea is happening. But in February, again, something happened. There was a leak, 6 tons of radioactive water, and at the same point, and so that created a major scare. And people then began doing these studies, writing about it, and saying that how do public discourses, popular culture, scientific and mathematical debates, research, people's beliefs continue to engage with an enormous issue like this, which is entangled in unthinkable devastation, displacement, loss, survival, memories, anxieties, uncertainties, and reassurances. And there is a monument of regrets and messages that has been built in Fukushima at the power plant. And they say it's a monument and regret to the future about nuclear power. They say that resisting the tyranny of the nuclear industry and the government for 40 years, we failed to prevent a nuclear disaster from happening. Nuclear power has revealed its extremely dangerous nature, robbing our homeland of its past, present, and future, and we aim to convey the importance of sharpening our senses, applying wisdom, and uniting to face irrational schemes with scientific power and boundless love for life. Now, this immediately reminds me of what these fish workers were saying during the lawsuit. What is it that they were saying? And they kept saying that, we have to remember that the ocean, they say that the ocean is a sacred existence. It's a living thing. It's not a dumping ground. And it supports life. It supports lives and livelihoods. And they attempted to stop, they said, the incursion of the Japanese government and the power company in order to maintain their fishing lifestyle, but also hold on to their sense of dignity. For them, not only is the ocean not a dumping ground for toxic waste, fish is not a commercial product. It's not just to buy and sell. It's an offering from the sea. And there is a fundamental relation between this offering from the sea and them. It's our source of pride to use this offering to feed other people. And they were reminding us in this meeting that in 1954, 45, Japan saw the bombing, atom bomb. So they keep remembering what happened. In 54, there was a major radioactive scare again in the fish. And they said that tuna was supposed to have been contaminated. And they said that they still remember. One older person said he remembers how when they were asked to go 3 days out into the sea, where the deepest sea, they could then dump this tuna. And they wouldn't tell us how much tuna. I liked it. They said it was tuna that would have fed 300,000 people. So for them, it's like food for 300,000 people. So they said, when people actually were forced to dump it, they held their hands, they prayed, and they felt they were throwing their children into the sea. They said that was the emotion with which they were throwing their fish. So just watching this debate and this discussion of people talking about what this meant, and today also questioning how the government and the power company is dealing with this, and again saying it's not just livelihoods, our dignity, it's our pride. We cannot fish. The ocean doesn't give us fish to either freeze it and store it or to throw it away and dump it. So this is completely unacceptable. And so I would just like to leave it here that what is it? This is 21st century that we're talking about, the dilemmas of 21st century, the devastations that we are seeing. We are seeing how nuclear energy power plants that were closed are being opened now because of the Ukraine war, because of the war that is going on. And, again, there's a rethinking. So how do we bring in a maths which is free of this banality, which is free of this banality of evil, which really has an ethics of looking at what questions it is going to be raising, how it is going to be looking at, how does it look at people's lives and knowledges, does not divorce it and just calculate something without even looking what impact it has, and more so now in terms of ecological justice, because we know that a large part of the debate is only looking at it in terms of money and carbon footprints. It's not looking at in terms of people's lives and survival. So it is in the global south that we have to raise these questions. And I will close it here. Thanks a lot.
Anita, this was simply brilliant. It came across as a poetry. I thought mathematics just invites students of mathematics to a seminar. Now I feel it's a talk on education. And at one level, it's also philosophy of education, like you finally bring in the very context of education and what mass education, like broadening its scope to talk about education in general and also for the survival of this earth. I think this was absolutely brilliant. And I don't know, you should come to JNU and give a face-to-face lecture on this. I'm doubly delighted. So mass was at the center, but what was discussed was actually this earth and the life of people in every possible ways. Brilliant. And I really am thankful to you for delivering this kind of lecture. In fact,
thank you.
I'm just doubly surprised. I knew it is going to be brilliant, but I thought it will be mathematics and a lot of mathematics. It is actually mathematics, very substantive kind of mathematics, but it's education that you discussed. So thanks a lot. And we'll just see in future how we, find an opportunity to get you to give a public lecture in JNU. And of course, an online lecture, is accessible to everybody. So there is another advantage of online lectures, but certainly now I'm motivated to get you to JNU, but also to a bigger audience where something like this should be actually discussed.
Actually, it's interesting because even in the work that we do for maths education, outside and society, internationally now for the first time, because I've been a member of the International Commission for Maths Instruction, the EC. But I know that they're very careful, and I know some people in that who are members of these groups which decide curriculum for the future, and no one from the global south. But for the first time, after great pressure, they're now looking at ecological issues in maths education. Because this is something that you can't ignore. You can't just sit back, So that is for the first time this happened. It was considered quite political for these large bodies in maths and science. So this is interesting. For the first time, they're looking, for the first time, a handbook is coming out where I was asked to write, and they said, we are looking at controversial issues. And they gave me a theme of, should there be an international or a transnational curriculum in maths education? They
Okay.
gave me that. And so obviously, it's very close to my heart to say, how do we look at it? So I'm happy that this trend I'm seeing very recently, at least at the international level.
Now, I'm really glad that we probably invited you at the right time to address us.
Thank you.
This is absolutely brilliant, well, I'll not take more time. So let's open it to more dialogue. And please unmute yourself. And you can also switch on your video and ask question directly to Professor Anita Rampal. And if some have sent message there, have sent their questions through text. Varsa, you can read those questions if we have received some. Otherwise, by the time Varsa figures out how many questions are there, others can actually unmute themselves and ask directly.
Till now,
Just
nobody
open.
has posted.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anybody who have any question, queries, observations, they can ask ma'am directly. Yeah.
Hi, ma'am. Sorry, I joined the session quite late, but I just had the question regarding the higher education. You mentioned that there should be a gap or there should be a bridge between the things we taught in higher classes into school system. So I just wanted to understand what all do you suggest, because what we teach in Indian schools in this school system and what we teach them in their graduations are quite two very different things, and sometimes that actually does not provide any base to their school system. So what should we do at the moment who are in the schools, what as a teacher or as a professor in or as a product, what can we do to actually create that bridge?
Where do you teach? Where are you teaching?
Ritu,
Is that Ritu asking?
Ritu Maurya, I can read that.
Yeah, Ritu
Next.
Maurya.
At what level are you teaching?
So we have a product which is for K-12 students.
What does that mean? A product?
Uh,
Basically, I am from an edtech organization which works for the students who are in the schools.
Okay.
And yeah, so our product helps students in the forms of videos, quizzes to learn, make their learning more accessible, more easy, more flexible. So, as I just wanted to understand, what should I can do for them to bridge this gap?
So I don't know what gap you're referring to, but one thing in our system, we clearly see that some effort we made at the earlier classes to change, especially primary mathematics, to actually engage mathematics make it much more close to people's ways of relating to mathematics, including the language and the context. And but later on in higher classes, it becomes again completely abstract and just with a lot of jargon and terminology. So the discipline just comes heavy on the learner, and there's very little that you can do about it unless you as teachers you actually engage with the same ideas, whether you're whatever ideas that you're doing in terms of the content there, you unravel it, open it, and try and give it some meaning and significance. But the problem is that they at higher levels to change it becomes even more problematic because they try to align with it, becomes a gatekeeper which is going to keep most people out in these very competitive entrance exams, whether it's to a college or to engineering or to whatever. So the unfortunate thing is that we've allowed mathematics become a gatekeeper. And this seems to screen out most of the people because lakhs of people are trying for the same seats. And this seems to act as a screen. And we must then resist that. We must actually individually do less than do things more collectively. Resist this, bring it out in the open, bring it out in the public. What is it that is being forced on these young children or these youth to be doing at grade 12? And is that at all making sense? Even after grade 10, how many people actually do that in an interesting way? Very often people want to quit mathematics as soon as possible. People join open school just because they want to quit mathematics. And why
Yes.
should that be?
Hmm. Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Varsha, there is a question in the chat. Can you read that out?
Yes, ma'am. So R has written that hi ma'am, what do
Yeah.
you say about the feasibility of the topic of integration of 21st century skills and creating modules for that as a topic of PhD study? So R, you can also unmute yourself and ask, or maybe elaborate on the question that you are trying to ask. He's asking about the feasibility of the topic of integration of 21st century skills and creating modules for that as a PhD topic.
But what are these 21st century skills? I'm questioning what these skills are defined as.
Ma'am, these 21st century skills of like 4 C's of learning, if we can integrate it with some primary school textbooks and creating like an environment where students can learn these skills
Why
with
do
the
you have to go in such a formulaic way? These 4 C's of learning. What is that? Don't we have a huge paradigm of learning? Don't we understand what really education should be? What are these 4 C's just because someone said 21st century 4 C's? I'm questioning these formulaic ways of looking at 21st century skills. In fact, I think in the 21st century, what I was raising is that there is much more integration of what we think is head and hand, or what we think is inquiry and invention. These are, when people are looking at it, they're saying you can't separate these things out. You can't say this is mathematics and this is applications. So how do you teach? How do you design a curriculum which is integrating this and integrating other aspects of life? But I don't understand what you understand by 21st century skills. So what are these 4 C's? You tell me.
like communication skills and critical thinking, creativity, and collaboration. Like basically focusing on the learning.
So is that
Learning
only
aspect of
21st
it.
century, or was that also in the 20th century? We were talking of the same things even in the last century.
Yes, ma'am, but the need of the hour is like a bit different now that it's like too much required, and since the schooling system hasn't been integrating these in the classroom itself, like it's still more discipline focused. So if we
Yeah.
can also create some modules and more activities based on specific objective of fostering these skills. So like how do you think it could be a feasible topic, like or is it already like too much done and dusted? That was my question.
Also important in 20th century. And even when Naitalim was, being done in schools, it was as important even then. Cooperation was as important. Our Mudaliar Commission in 1952 is saying that you learn cooperatively. It's only when you do a task together that you're learning and that you discipline yourself. You don't need the school to be disciplining. So why are we suddenly getting into this fad? It's problematic when even sort of teachers start thinking that this is something that just because some direction has come, some new fad has come, some new terminology has come, there's nothing new about this. If our books are not right, it means we've not really followed the humanist perspective of education. All these things we've been talking about, whether we talked about theories of learning, or we talked about Vygotsky, or we talked about anything, or Gandhi, or anyone.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
what is something so new about these 4 C's? My thing is 21st century should make us question just taking a mantra and looking at the wider way in which education is looked at, and changing this whole thing about some people will do knowledge and others will do skills. We are hearing that. Aren't we hearing that in school and in our policy that some people will be doing skill-based courses? The others can go into knowledge-based courses. Let's first collapse that.
Yeah.
So that is our challenge. Collaboration and communication and critical thinking, they were never away from education or maths education.
They're also part of one story. We never disintegrated them.
Yes,
They were
that's
not
right.
like 4 pillars. They were one. To achieve that education, we needed to do all these. So we
Yeah,
in that language. We
yeah.
talked about one process, and where all these are achieved, we didn't separately mention them and also achieve them separately. So what do you do? Or I don't really know your name. I'm sorry because
Ma'am, it's beside Rakia.
Rakia, okay. Rakia, I mean, suppose you develop 4 different modules. How will you do that when they are not 4 separate processes at any level? I mean, tech cognition, tech social, at no level, there are 4 separate processes. So how do you develop? I mean, I think we have succeeded in sort of disintegrating,
Are you
a
thinking of doing
larger
it?
process of learning.
Yes, ma'am. I was thinking of doing it since, I see that despite of the thing that it's been said that we should be integrating it, but it's not coming as has been coming into the form itself,
No,
because
but if
more or less.
anything that you do, if you plan a good learning transaction, it will have communication, it should have collaboration, it should have critical thinking. And what is your fourth thing? What is your fourth?
Collaboration, creativity. Sorry.
Creativity. So anything that you do should have all of these in different measures. But I mean, without collaboration, we don't really see it. So you mean, are you thinking of doing a separate model only for collaboration?
No,
Is
no,
that what?
like for example, if I just take a example of EVS as a subject, like 3 to 5th we have EVS, and
Yeah.
there are skill is already like the focus of that. So if I just integrate all these more activities based on these specific skills, so that would be like beneficial for students, and we will not be requiring to have a separate subject for that, because that would be like very disintegrated. But trying to integrate it with subject itself can make it even beneficial for the students. That was the
Are
idea.
you a primary teacher?
Yeah, I had been a primary teacher, but I qualified my night GRF exam, so I was planning to do PhD on
A
this
PhD.
topic.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
But no, I think that don't get that's what it's problematic when someone gets enamored by some new 4 C's which have already existed. I mean, what I would say is that you can look at whatever I mean, the primary textbooks. I don't know if you're familiar with the NCRT books or if you've used the EVS textbooks. They deal with various contexts, isn't it? They deal with even context because in NCRT you have to look at across the country. So you can't just talk of one place because you're forced to look at it. So they deal with context of whether it's a shelter somewhere or water management somewhere in the history of that, or it's farmers and what are the problems that they face. So anything that you take, wherever you are, and in that context, if you take something which is meaningful to children's lives, in through the environment, you will have all these things. You will have to have some activities where there is collaboration. Children learn anything collaboratively. They shouldn't be learning alone. That's what
Yes.
at the early ages we know that you don't learn as an individual sole learner. So you do things together. You question things together. You look at something together. So whatever
Mm.
you design, we'll have that. Don't call it 21st century, please.
Can I join Anita in just explicating this question a little further, Anita?
Yeah.
Is it okay? Well, Rakia, like we are wired if I just look at the brain, I'm a psychologist,
Yeah.
we are wired in a manner that all these happen together. I cannot communicate unless I collaborate. I cannot collaborate unless I'm creative. Because, like, how do I understand your project? Your project, even if you present it very, very, clearly to me, my way of engaging with your project is always a creative work because there are still some gaps. I bridge that gap. And if I'm not capable of creative thinking, I'll not be able to collaborate. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And also, what is natural is this collaboration, is this, and this collaboration brings in a kind of critical understanding of each other and also creates a larger, canvas uh, to reflect upon. So, when I disintegrate them into four, that is artificial. That's my intervention. Brain is wired for doing these four
Mm-hmm.
things together.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in curriculum, we go against human brain, our understanding of human brain and human mind, and create four different tracks. This is artificial. Okay. And then these artificial trajectories are made the primary goals. Well, one can do that. But does that then take us closer to a bigger objective? No, we actually don't accomplish any major objective. Like Fukushima example, when Professor Rampal was giving, that was one of the best example of how all these four and many more other, objectives are met through only one, cognitive or social cognitive engagement with a crisis, with a larger question of life or livelihood.
Mm-hmm.
And we were doing mathematics, we were doing many other things. So education is all about that, we don't generally segregate. And that's what I thought, like we had been talking about ever since our first education policy, how these exist in an integrated manner. And therefore, even if we have subjects like, EVS or language or mathematics, and in higher classes, mathematics, physics, political science, even if we segregate the subjects, we know that we think in integrated manner. And the best way of creating a layered and more critical dialogue is accomplished only through a process of integration. And therefore, like I completely agree with. So this is where, we need to, I think, engage with these policy documents little at a deeper level, because I
Yeah.
think this policy document is too verbose, and also in the same page when you put 40, 50 concepts, and many of them are very overlapping. They're not mutually exhaustive. So one really doesn't understand what is our final goal, So when Professor Rampal says that let's not get trapped by these forces, there is a huge reason behind, I think since you'll be starting your PhD,
Mm-hmm.
you'll be doing a lot of fundamental readings, and many of those readings, simple readings by Tech Vygotsky or Tech, I mean, take any good scholar, you will, come to reflect the way, Professor Rampal is talking now. Yeah, you're starting the journey. You will soon encounter this problem, So
Yeah.
I'm just waiting for
Thank
that
you
day
so much, ma'am.
when it gets
Anita
complicated.
ma'am and Minati ma'am, thank you so much for your perspectives, and I think it has enriched my insight, and certainly try to integrate your suggestions and also modify my topic a little bit.
Yeah, just do some basic, very fundamental readings, not very textbook or Kunje kind, but read some original authors. These will get
Yeah.
sorted out very quickly,
The problem is that for, PhD research, we suddenly think we have to look for something new. And then when you're looking for new, you look at new discourses and you say, okay, this seems new, so let's sort of explore this. But yeah, you have to be critical even of some of these things which are so-called new. That's what I'm
Yeah.
trying to say.
Yes.
But the challenge that it's not being done, or the challenge that we're going against it and we are separating out people and pushing in deliberately more abstract things, saying that this will be high paying jobs, is what is being questioned. That is that the maths that everyone has to do, or is it just one way of throwing out many people?
Mm.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, I think this
Hello.
raises many political questions,
Yeah.
actually. Yeah, there's
Anushri
a
has,
question.
Anushri has raised her hand. Anushri, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes, thank you so much. Hi, Professor Anita Rampal. I am Anushri. I am an MA education student at Mahindra University. So, when I saw the title of the talk today, this was definitely not something I was expecting, but I'm really glad I had the opportunity to listen to you. And so this is less of a question and more of a concern that I have as somebody who's hoping to be in MER in the future. So all these issues, right? Curriculum that does not make sense to students, and all these there has been research in contextualization, indigenization, and whatnot in specific to math education as well over the years. But for some reason, all of these discourses seem to be restricting themselves at a research level, at theory level, and at the ground level things doesn't seem to be changing a lot. And while the research is expanding, while there is so much happening in mathematics education research, there isn't much change happening at the ground level. And as somebody who wants to be in mathematics education research, I'm not sure how to wrap my head around it. So I just wanted to, yeah, thank you.
Okay. I'm curious. You said you didn't expect this. I'm curious to know, what were you expecting
Uh,
from the title?
Yeah, it might be a very typical like I was expecting we would talk about technology and like a very typical understanding of what 21st century skills would be and whatnot. And
Hmm.
I am glad you did not talk about that. And yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's true, because again, it happens that what is it that you're looking at technology for? I mean, what is technology? Again, we start asking that, technology is not just the computers or the silicon chips that I was talking about. I mean, technologies can be more else. And people even producing those are getting very worried that where are people going to come from if they're not entering these fields? If not enough people, even mathematics researchers, are entering these fields, how are we going to be doing this and understanding these better?
This
Yeah.
is
This,
interesting.
no,
The title actually says 21st century discourses and not skills, but our mind is so hardwired that we
Yeah.
think that if it's 21st century, it might be skills.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
my thing was that, are we looking at the material world or not?
Yes.
There is an ethereal world, and that's what these people, even economists and others who are talking about what's happening to the planet or what's happening to the world, are saying that all these discourses are coming from an ethereal world, which thinks that the material world they have nothing much to do with. They can get all that they want, all the resources they want can be extracted and mined, and literally you can do what you want. That is what the debate about ecological justice or injustice is, that there is some part of the world which thinks that our lives are non-negotiable, and all these other things can be taken care of by the planet, the way it's being totally devastated in the name of dematerializing and outsourcing their needs. So my question was that if people who are looking at education and all these discourses from the ethereal world, which is in the air, you don't even see what's happening to the materials around you, then where are we going? How do we look at mathematics even when we actually engage with the material world? That is my very simple sort of question and agenda.
I just want to raise one. It's not a question. Like we quickly use these two terms which Anusri used. I'm happy that Anusri used them. Contextualization and indigenization. The politics of both these terms are very different. I think uh, we have been using indigenization so frequently that we tend to use them as a replaceable term, mutually replaceable. They are not. Politics of both the terms are very different.
Yeah.
So the politics of indigenization is very different from politics of contextualization.
Did she use the term? I missed it.
Yeah,
She
both
used,
used. Yeah, I know because these two terms are used very frequently in psychology, and I know where exactly it is going, and it's
Yeah.
really scary, and that's why I thought I just mentioned.
In the current context, I'm so careful. I've always talked of traditional indigenous knowledge, etc., but now I'm so careful because one, In our country, indigenous is, we know, IKS, etc., etc. Huge bandwagon where anything goes, and it's very questionable. But in the international discourse, indigenous only means tribal, I mean, First
Yeah,
Peoples,
definitely.
Aboriginals. Whereas I now talk of artisanal because, people, like that's why I said people, if I look at people growing food and 4 billion in the world and 2.5 billion in Asia, then I'm talking of artisanal, whether it's a farmer or whether it's a weaver, people who are working with materials. That is the work that I'm looking at. That's the world that I'm looking at.
Wonderful. Okay, more questions?
So there is a question in chat box, and Arjun also raised his hand. So we'll take this question and then ask Arjun to unmute himself and ask his question. So in chat, Abhinav Mishra writes that, can you share your thoughts on how the innovative methods of teaching mathematics introduced by NCF 2005 have been overshadowed by the focus on basic numeracy drills? This shift has made classrooms increasingly monotonous for students. How to reverse that? Yeah.
Okay, so who has asked this?
Abhinav Mishra.
Okay. So I'm glad that you do see the challenge when we talk about FLN. FLN is, if you see also the way it's devised and also discourse around FLN, both of them. So one, of course, is that FLN says, and the National Curriculum Framework says that you don't need EVS. So they've thrown out EVS. And because there was and they gave reasons saying that, well, they're mostly science teachers and they cannot engage in social discourses. They say that. So they put it on the teacher. But that's just rhetoric, because there was pressure when they said they called it the world around us. And they said it'll be done mostly through visits and observations and activities. You don't need a textbook. But then there was a lot of backlash because people felt that you can't not have a textbook. So they've forged a new subject called the world around us. It's very strange. No one in the world uses this term. People think it's the name of a textbook rather than a subject. And so they're doing that, and it's completely sort of a mishmash. I know people who are engaged with writing it and how things are being thrown out. You don't want anything. You don't want to talk about gender. You don't want any social mention of caste, nothing. But you want to do this world around us in a most sort of, again, alienated manner. So this is one. And the whole pressure on literacy and numeracy, again, why? We have always been doing, or at least speaking of the need for early language and early mathematics. Why call it numeracy and literacy? But the global documents, the UNESCO documents or other global documents clearly say that, and they name the organization, they say Pratham and Central Square Foundation have, two non-state actors, have actually claimed that they've claimed credit for having brought in FLN into the policy for the first time. One, to strengthen the foundational stage, but also as a cost-cutting measure. So both these are questionable. Why is a cost-cutting measure? At the earlier stage, already we're talking of that. So private schools will do what they want. They never really followed, even earlier the NCF, or earlier they followed whatever books they wanted to. But now it'll be even much more stark that you bring in Anganwadi teachers, you bring in all that. Diverse also means disparities, children coming from disparate backgrounds, but children with various knowledges. So how do you acknowledge that and not just focus on something as their reading and writing, but much more about their knowledge? And also EVS was meant to integrate both a social understanding and environmental and scientific understanding. And it was, you're working together. It's a constructivist project. And so it was, and the NCF told us that unless you bring it open, unless you unravel these differences and these disparities, what does it mean for children to be marginalized? Unless we bring those life worlds also into the experience for everyone, everyone needs to be understanding this. We are not really addressing from a rights perspective or a humanist perspective. We're not addressing primary education.
Arjun, you can unmute yourself and ask your question. Arjun?
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, the voice is breaking a bit, but yes.
Hello,
No.
I think I'm not.
Arjun, meantime, can you
Ma'am,
send a text? Okay, we can hear you now. Just let's see.
okay, okay, let me try.
Arjun, I think you typed the question. Unless he gets the question right, you won't be able to respond. Just type the question, and meantime, we can take questions from others. Varsha, are you there?
Yes, ma'am. There are no questions as per
Okay.
in the chat box. There are no questions. If anybody has any questions, they can raise their hands now or just speak.
Any other question?
We can wait for Arjun for a few seconds. And
Varsha, do you have any
There is something in chat.
he just thanked you for your.
Okay. Can you share your thoughts on how innovative? Okay. The same thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was Abhinav. Yeah.
Am I audible now? Because it was
Yes, Arjun, you're audible now.
not okay. Okay. So, ma'am, it was a very nice talk. Like it was not as a mathematics talks because I really have a lot of fear from mathematics. So, my question or rather a comment was coming from my personal experience or my fear that I had with mathematics. So I earlier as well asked in a discussion about mathematics. So what is it about the mathematics, or it has something that or is it about the language of mathematics that creates some sort of isolation in the learner? And
We are losing your voice. I think so. You're asking about what is it about mathematics that we tend to alienate such a large majority?
yeah, alienate society. So it's from
Alienate
within itself, like the discipline and yeah.
and intimidate. Yes, that is the biggest challenge in maths education. And in fact, most of us who've been working in it, even within the framework of maths for social justice, I mean, people across the world, or we in India, have been working in it through critical pedagogy, because the idea was this, that you can't use a certain discipline to actually marginalize and throw out people, because it intimidates people the way it is done. So and we have shown, I mean, my own researches, my own students have shown that the way we do it, for instance, even the way we assess. So there was one student whose PhD was only about culturally responsive assessment. And there was no teaching that she was doing, but when she was working with class 8 students, when our assessment tasks had more purpose for the students, when they could relate themselves to what had to be done, they could not, for instance, if you ask them in their own school exam, if someone got 13 marks or 20 marks on data handling, so they didn't know how to find an average, or, they were stumped by certain formulae because it had never made sense to them. But when they volunteered to do the midday meal records of the school, and this group said, we'll keep all the records. It was fascinating to watch them because we were not teaching. We were only watching how the assessment they tackled. And that is what we are trying to say, that does it have a purpose for you? Does the learner associate herself or himself with it? And they realized even to count the number of children who came for the midday meal at a certain time, they used to get lost. And then they realized that there was something like these tally marks, which we had learned some time back. Maybe we can try them. So the different tools that they may have learned somewhere, never found them useful, didn't even realize how should you find an average of 5 numbers, because they took a certain responsibility, the way they learned things themselves. They actually then read up some things, they learned from each other. They also realized that first they thought sitting with the person they wanted to sit next to was the one who got the most marks, was probably not the best person to sit next to when you were actually engaging with the task, because there were people who were going deeper and not just quick at doing mathematics. So the way they looked at mathematics, you have to be fast, you have to get the right answer. No, that's not necessary. We have to be doing this if we really have to achieve our goals. So we have to change the goals, we have to change the way we look at mathematics, we have to relate it with your own purposes. Like in Kerala, when they changed the assessment pattern, they said, why should we ask anyone to just add some numbers or multiply some numbers? So they won't ask questions like that. So even here, I'm only talking about assessments, but obviously assessment is tied to the way maths has to be conceptualized, has to be taught. We don't have to just throw some names and throw some definitions, but draw it from what is the purpose of doing it. And that makes a difference. So that's why for us, mathematics for me has always been a challenge because it throws out so many children. And the idea is to change the face of mathematics, to change the nature of doing it so that it engages people.
Thank you so much, Professor Anita Rampal, for this insightful discussion and bringing people a little more closer to mathematics and just decreasing their fear of mathematics, and also bringing people closer to the larger discussion about mathematics education and mathematics education discourses. Every time we get this kind of reaction from people that this is not I was expecting, and every time they feel very overwhelmed that, oh, this was something else. And thank you very much for opening up this whole discourse, and yeah, thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Anita.
Thanks,
Now
Vinity.
I'm motivated to get you
Okay.
to people on the question of education, but you actually demystify a lot of things, and the fear goes there for and mathematics should be discussed like this with education students in general. No, I'm now motivated to get you now face to face to JNU. But we can, Varsa, because JNU, very few students work on mathematics
Yeah.
education. And that's where I was not very sure.
Yeah.
A face-to-face,
Yeah.
interaction will get many students.
Yeah.
But Varsa, we can collaborate with, Delhi University. Like there are many universities in Delhi itself.
Yeah.
So we can collaborate with other universities, both psychology, education, and mathematics departments. Also,
Yeah.
language. Some linguists may be interested in questions like what we are asking. Then we can have a nice, big face-to-face interaction with Anita.
Yeah.
I think Anita, it'll take few months, maybe 3-4 months, 4-5 months, but we will plan to do it.
Yeah.
And thank you.
Yeah. And actually, the time was also short. So I did contact a few of my students, but at this time they'll be teaching and things like that. So that I'm sure if we have something recorded, it might be useful. We can, see it later.
Yeah, we recorded it. We bought actually with our money because universities now don't give money to us.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah, we thought we'll record these lectures so that it is accessible to everybody.
Yeah.
And it's, also Jayashree and others wrote to me, same thing, like this is end of the semester and we have exams. So many people join. We should have done it on Saturday, no?
Yeah.
Like me actually.
Yeah.
So we wanted to join because of this end semester thing. People actually couldn't join in large number. But the talk was brilliant. So
thank you.
We'll upload the YouTube, the video in YouTube.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anita.
Thank
Varsha,
you. Bye, Varsha.
Yeah, we thank everybody who joined us. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.